Sophie and the Ark of Imonglia. Chapter 0. Morven Spills the Beans. Sophie's adventure began under the most unexpected of circumstances. 5 years ago, in the rainy streets of London, on the road where her life splintered into pieces and inevitably landed her in the curious house of her eccentric Aunt Zelda. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, dear listener," Morven muttered, glancing at the passenger seats. "Fear's going to have my shell if it finds out I've been clucking my turtle beak about Sophie. But you've got to understand her story. It's incredibly important. She is incredibly important." The turtle cocoa pan shuddered as it hurled down the loopy tracks of the dark hall of matter. The darkness around them was absolute, broken only by the faint shimmer from the tracks and the soft glow of the fibrous strands that made up the eerie void. "You see, Sophie didn't tumble into my turtle cocoa pan by accident," Morven continued conspiratorially, leaning closer. "In life, nothing's ever an accident, especially not when Imonglia is concerned. But this is a big secret, so let's keep this between us, shall we? Sophie has a gift, much like her mum Laura did," Morven said, a touch of warmth entering its voice. "Or a curse, as her Aunt Zelda liked to call it. And that gift is tied to everything. Her family, this place, even fear itself. But let me start from the beginning." Her parents, both devoted botanists, often took her on their expeditions, teaching her about plants and the wonders of nature. Their little family was a tight-knit trio, bound by shared adventures and bedtime stories beneath a canopy of stars. "They were definitely my favorite," Morven sighed, "and I've met plenty." "Honeysuckle," her dad would say, pointing to the fragrant blossoms along the path. "It's like nature's candy, but you have to share it with the bees." Meanwhile, her mum, Laura, would carefully sketch the delicate blooms in her notebook, murmuring about their medicinal properties. Everything has a story. You just have to listen closely enough to hear it. Nothing could have prepared Sophie for what happened next. One rainy evening, as they drove back from a weekend trip, the car skidded on the slick road. The memories of that night blurred together in Sophie's mind, a cacophony of screeching tires, her mother's sharp gasp, and the sickening crunch of metal. When Sophie awoke in the hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant and the rhythmic beeping of machines immediately filled her with dread. She scanned the empty room, desperately searching for her parents. "I was there on a call-out, dropping off confusion, grief and despair, when the doctor entered the room, barely glancing in Sophie's direction," Morven said with a sigh, the weight of its words heavy. "Humans can be so blind sometimes." "Your parents didn't survive the crash. I'm sorry for your loss," the doctor said flatly, his words pragmatic, stripped of any real emotion. He paused, scanning her medical notes. "But you were lucky. You'll be fine." "How wrong was he?" Morven clucked.
"Who, in the name of the adrenal medulla, are you talking to?"
interrupted Fia's voice from the passenger seat. Morven froze, its eyes darting nervously. "Oh, just, rehearsing my grocery list," it stammered. "Tea leaves, basil, powdered courage, spilled beans, canned beans."
What are you cooking? A soup against common sense?
Fia did not sound amused.
Grandma's special recipe,
Morven squeaked, before muttering under its breath.
We don't have much time. I'd better get through the whole story, which is where Zelda comes in. Let me tell you about her.
With no close relatives willing to take her in, Sophie was sent to Zelda, her mother's estranged sister. Zelda lived in a quaint Georgian townhouse in Marylebone, London, at number 13 Montagu Street, a place that seemed frozen in time. The house was crammed with books and peculiar artefacts, old maps, dusty compasses, and shelves lined with jars of mysterious substances. No TV. Zelda was an eccentric woman, with a mane of ginger curls as wild as her personality, and a penchant for wearing mismatched socks. She spoke in riddles and had an odd habit of talking to her plants as if they were old friends.
Oscar the orchard will keep an eye on you,
she announced on Sophie's first night, carefully placing the plant on her windowsill.
And if you're ever feeling sad, Fred the fern in the dining room always has a good joke up his fronds.
Despite her quirks, Zelda welcomed Sophie with open arms, her eccentric warmth tempered by a deep-seated sorrow for the loss they both shared. A week after Sophie moved in, Zelda surprised her with a trip to a farm in Yorkshire.
Every home needs a dog, Zelda declared matter-of-factly. Our one would have to be an Old English Sheepdog, the big, fluffy kind.
The 4-hour drive through traffic jams and roadworks was grueling, but Sophie didn't care. She was too excited to meet the puppies. Max was the clumsiest of the litter, tumbling over his oversized paws and barreling into the other pups. But he had heart, and Sophie fell in love with the rugged troublemaker instantly.
This one,
she said, laughing as Max scrambled into her lap, his tail wagging furiously.
Zelda raised an eyebrow.
He is perfect. Perfect chaos, that is, she muttered, but paid the breeder without hesitation. On the drive back, Sophie cradled the panting bundle of joy in her lap.
What should we call him? She wondered aloud. What about Buddy or Teddy? Maybe Rex?
Zelda glanced at the rearview mirror, her brow furrowing as if deep in thought.
Let's see. He doesn't look like a Buddy. Then, with absolutely no hesitation, she blurted, Oh, he is definitely a maximum scraff, if I've ever seen one. Fits him like an oversized sock.
Sophie let out a surprised giggle, but the name seemed oddly suitable for this messy ball of hair, with fur sticking out in all directions.
We call him Max for short,
she agreed, scratching behind his floppy ears. Over the years, Sophie and Aunt Zelda rarely spoke about her parents, until a few days ago, when Sophie accidentally stumbled across her mother's old childhood diary in the attic. She spotted the battered leather-bound journal tucked inside an ornate wooden bowl. The words Laura's Notes were faintly etched into the cover. Laura's fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside, her mum's exquisite botanical sketches unfolded before her eager gaze. A faint smile played on Sophie's lips as she flipped through the pages, until her eyes landed on an almond-shaped outline of something that had been drawn and then carefully erased, leaving only a ghostly impression on the paper. Above it, in Laura's delicate handwriting, were the words, "Find it. It will lead you to where nothing else can."
"What's this?"
Sophie asked Zelda that evening, holding up the journal. Zelda's face paled.
That was your mother's," she said cautiously. "Sophie, you should know, your parents were kind people, but they weren't careful."
Zelda swirled her teacup, a habit she had when nervous.
They saw things they weren't meant to see, things that don't belong in this world.
Sophie frowned. What do you mean? Zelda shook her head, her wild ginger hair swaying.
It's better if you don't know, my dear. Not yet. It's too soon.
When will you tell me? Sophie pressed, her voice trembling.
After I am back from the retreat, Zelda promised.
Morven shifted around, adjusting to the curve of the railways.
Zelda disappeared to these so-called spiritual retreats every Christmas. It was her way of coping with what happened to her and Laura when they were Sophie's age, Morven explained. She would return exactly 2 weeks later, with a suitcase of peculiar souvenirs and increasingly outlandish stories.
Before each departure, Zelda lovingly stocked the freezer with home-cooked meals that could survive a nuclear winter, but not a fork, and packets of mince pies.
Or just go for takeout,
she'd say with a wink, as she kissed Sophie on the forehead, handing over an envelope of cash.
Take care of Max, and remember, if there's an emergency, Zelda would add, clambering into her airport cab, drink my emergency brew. It's powerful stuff. I'll be back before you could say detartrated tatter-a-tat in reverse. Which brings me to the main point of my story, Morven said, its voice dropping to a near whisper. The reason why Sophie and the Ark are forever connected is because...
A deafening screech of metal cut into its words. The turtle cocoa pan shuddered violently, veering off course and spraying sparks along the shimmering tracks.
Emergency override detected, a cold mechanical voice warned, reverberating through the cocoa pan. Unauthorized boarding in progress. All systems recalibrating.
Fear yelped, gripping its seat tightly.
Blast! What is it now?
The cocoa pan groaned and slowed. An ominous shadow crept over the passenger seats, followed by the sound of frantic paws scrambling on metal.
Oh, it's you!
Morven exclaimed, its beak clacking in disbelief.
What are you doing here?
Like and subscribe to join the adventure. Sophie and the Ark of Amonglia is out now on ebook and audiobook.